we go through DIDLS, the first thing we're going to focus on is diction. DIDLS, as I mentioned before, is an acronym to remember those elements of tone that should be considered when evaluating any kind of prose or poetry. So I want you guys to pause the video right now and think about for a second, what does DIDLS stand for? Do you remember what DIDLS stands for? So pause right now and come back when you remember it. So hopefully you got that DIDLS stands for diction, images or imagery, details, language, and syntax. So let's go into diction in a bit more depth. So diction, as I mentioned before, is the words an author uses to convey ideas to a reader. We have to ask, why are the words chosen? We're going to look at two different things with diction. The first thing is the level of formality of the writing. And the second thing, we're going to look at the connotation and the denotation, something you might remember from previous years. To analyze diction, we have to think about the author's purpose. Why are they writing this? Then we have to pay close attention to the word choice. And finally, we should look for patterns. If something appears more frequently, it's something we definitely want to write about in our passage analysis because it will definitely contribute to tone. We'll start with levels of formality for the two things you have to think about. It ranges all the way from formal to informal. So formal is the very elevated language that we see in writing. Any of these words could be applied to formal writing. You might see writing that is learned, you might see writing that's very scholarly, very elegant or flowery. In the middle, you've got very unadorned language. You've got plain, simple, detached language. It follows all the grammatical rules, but it's not necessarily elevated. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got that informal or everyday writing. And that kind of writing can be colloquial, it can have jargon, it can have slang, it can be abrupt or terse. You have to determine that based on how you interpret the passage. With diction, you also need to consider the connotation and denotation of the word choice. So here's a little comic about denotation versus connotation, and I do want you guys to pause the video so that you can see exactly what this comic is talking about. Here's a little pop quiz. If the language is literal and straightforward, the diction is A, denotative, or B, connotative. Pause the video until you know exactly what it is. Okay, so the correct answer for that was denotative. Next, if the language is symbolic, metaphoric, and poetic, the diction is denotative or connotative. Again, pause the video until you figured it out, then you can come on back. Welcome back. Hopefully you figured out that that language is connotative. So some possible responses for diction. In the name of work, the author writes in a level of connotation, level of formality style. Her use of connotation vocab and level of formality vocab language achieves this purpose. So let's actually apply this to the Heart of Darkness. So in Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad writes in a highly connotative high style. His use of abstract, poetic, and ornate language establishes existential themes of fate and meaninglessness. You can pause the video right now if you want to take a closer look and compare the exemplar with the actual example. Next up, we're going to look at figures of speech, and figures of speech often have connotative meanings. If you don't know what connotative means, you need to rewatch this video and make sure you know the difference between connotation and denotation before moving on. Thanks everyone!